Welcome, everybody. I'm glad you could make it for today's brown bag lecture. My name is Chandra, and I work at the Penticton Museum, and we're really pleased to be able to offer you our brown bag lecture today. And we have Anna Skurkina coming, and she is going to talk to us about how birds and cats interact in the wild and what we can do to help out the wildlife, because the cats are very good predators. So without further ado, I'm just going to turn it over to Anna.
Thank you. Turn on my mic. Can you guys hear me good? Hopefully people on Zoom can hear me as well and see me. Thanks everyone for coming. It's great to see you in the audience. I'm excited to talk about cats and birds today. I'm also very grateful to be working and living on the ancestral traditional territories of Syilx Okanagan people. And I present you a presentation about the cats and birds from the Stewardship Center for British Columbia. I work there as a project coordinator. And just before we kind of dive into the topic, I'll give you a bit of background about the Stewardship Center. So this is a non-for-profit organization that strengthens ecological stewardship by providing capacity building, educational, and technical resources for other organizations, local governments, the members of the public, as well as the private sector. And so cats and birds is actually one of our projects under Wildlife and Species at Risk program, where we work collaboratively with various partners from academia, animal welfare, conservation groups, to really provide ways that we can protect cats and birds in British Columbia. And so we do that through collaborative partnerships. We do a bunch of outreach, just like something I'm doing today, by giving presentations to the public or online. Oh, this is skipping. And then we also are doing research on the ground, which I'll talk about today. And then we are doing veterinary education and resource development for the public to access. And some of the key messages for today's presentations are really simple. Of course, first of all, outdoor cats face various dangers when they're outside and unsupervised, and they also pose enormous risk to our wildlife. The second key message is that public members, all of us together, really can protect cats and birds by really following a few simple ways, which I'll talk about today. And then the third key message is that only collaboratively we can address those global kind of large issues in our communities, and we can promote the information about ecological issues such as the impacts of roaming cats and birds, and also provide different actions, or talk about different actions and resources that we can use to really improve animal welfare in BC. So the first kind of chunk of the presentation will be about birds. We'll talk about the state of birds and what do we know about their population sizes. So recently, well, not recently now, a few years back in 2019, there was this really fabulous research that came out in North America. How many of you have heard of this paper or seen this paper? There you go, I see a couple of people, very nice. So this was really a grand research project. It was a collaborative work between scientists in North America who put together all information available about the estimate sizes of populations and birds, and they looked at the changes from the 1970s and found this huge decline in bird species. And so you can see there's a highlighted box that tells us that about 3 billion birds were lost since the 1970s, which is a huge number. And so what we have here is a nice graph that shows you the changes in the Canadian bird species. And again, it starts in the 1970s on the x-axis there, and then on the y-axis you can see the percent change in bird populations. And some birds did do pretty well. We see an increase in waterfowl and birds of prey, and that's of course due to amazing efforts of conservation scientists and people who work on the ground to protect the habitat, ban the DDT pesticides that are harming those birds. But yet there is a large portion of birds in the bottom part of the graph that have experienced a drastic decline. And if we look closely at the examples of species that we've lost or that we are losing, the first one, of course, the big group was aerial insectivores. swallows and birds that rely on insects are experiencing worse declines, and in this paper they've estimated that about 30% of their population have been lost. The grassland birds, of course, the ones that we are very fortunate to have here in the Okanagan, experienced a massive decline of over 50% in their population. It's estimated that for the eastern meadowlark, not the one that we see here, but in the eastern part of Canada, is that we're losing about 3 in every 4 meadowlarks. And then migratory birds. So if you look at the numbers, the aerial insectivores are 160 million. We got the grassland birds, 720 million birds, whereas the migratory birds experience an overall decline of 2.5 billion, which is, again, a very massive number, very alarming. And the question is really posed as why we are seeing those huge declines. And first of all, of course, the main source of overall biodiversity loss in our time is the habitat destruction, climate change, human encroachment on natural areas. And this is certainly very topical for us here in the Okanagan, where we are seeing massive developments in the valleys that are taking away grassland habitat, where some species only thrive here in the Okanagan, and it's unfortunate that some of those areas we can't protect for them. Now, this is a type of the, I guess, destruction that we're seeing massively and globally, and that's something that you and I cannot really address on a daily basis. Thank you. When we look at the human-caused mortalities of birds, we can have a rank of different sources, starting with cats and going to mining, different basically human activities on the landscape. And so there was this excellent paper in 2013 that pulled together different research studies that looked at the impacts of birds, and they found that cats are actually the primary source of wild bird mortality. And if you look at the numbers on the y-axis, if you look at the difference between cats and, say, the second human-related source, which are buildings, you can see the 10-fold difference. And just to look at the cats a little bit more closely, what we find is that in Canada alone, every year we lose between 100 and 350 million birds. So again, that's on the yearly basis, which is, again, a very huge number. There was also an estimate in a different research study that highlighted in general, worldwide, what we're seeing is that cats cause extinction of about 63 species, and they're also cause for 38 species to be critically endangered. And again, if we look back in time, historically, where the issue started happening more so was on the islands around Australia, New Zealand, and Hawaii, where there was a loss in birds that live on the islands because the population of cats have increased so dramatically that there was a visible impact that we're losing the birds. But then when we look at North American species, we find that the same thing is happening here in Canada, is that cats are still the primary source of the wild bird mortality. And so in the US, there are similar studies that have been done, but they show a higher statistic. So they state that outdoor roaming cats actually kill at about 1.3 to 4 billion birds, which is a lot more than in Canada. But then we also have to remember that, of course, small mammals are one of the main preys for cats as well. And in this report, they've estimated that up to 22 billion mammals can be taken annually by cats alone. And we can't forget about amphibians and reptiles and other prey items that are often taken by cats. In general, I guess I'm just wondering, how many of you guys cat owners have cats in your house? Great, thank you. We have a couple of people. What I wanted to say is that often enough, cat owners don't realize how much their cats, if they're allowed to go outside, how many prey items they actually catch, because cats tend to only bring back to the house less than 25% of their prey items. So that if you talk to somebody and they say, oh, my cat never brings back a bird, you might not actually know that for the fact, because cats would deal with their prey somewhere outside and then only bring home a small portion of their prey. And the question about bird vulnerability is interesting because, of course, not all birds can be predated upon by cats. And here's just like a quick little summary of birds that are most at risk of cats. We can think of ground-feeding birds such as sparrows. Of course, they would be much easier to catch. That's something like a large bald eagle. And so we can see that the songbirds that like to be around humans or like to come to bird feeders would be, of course, more at risk of cats. Also, birds that are nest lower to the ground or could nest in urban environments or, say, in somebody's backyard would be affected by cats more so than the birds that live, say, in forested or mountainous areas far away from people. The second source of human-related bird mortality is buildings. And of course, we know, and maybe it happened with some of you, that the birds do fly into windows, into reflective glass, and then they can get hit, and some of them might die. Has it happened to anybody in the past? Yeah, you've experienced that? And so often enough people think, oh yeah, large buildings, skyscrapers would be the main source of, window collisions. But actually, it was estimated that the majority of window strikes happen in 1 to 2 story buildings. And of course, it makes sense when you think about it. If a person lives in a nice area with a small house in the backyard, it's more likely that they would have green space around their house where birds like to dwell, and then they would be more likely to fly into those windows. And so in Canada, it was estimated that between 16 and 42 million birds die from window collisions on the annual basis. Yep. Yes. Yeah, certainly, yes. There is if we're lucky enough to find the birds that did strike the window but didn't die, sometimes it's possible to revive those birds, but again, not always that it's very successful. When we think about areas such as the Okanagan, where people live in rural environments a lot, we don't necessarily have a place to bring birds that are hit. We don't have a local songbird recovery place for them. And so sometimes it's just the time that helps them recover, and other times it could be lethal. But yeah, that's a good point. Thanks. Now I want to kind of shift gears and talk a little bit about cats. So Canada has experienced, or is still experiencing, a large cat overpopulation crisis. It's estimated that in Canadian homes, about 40% of households have cats as their pets. And cats seem to be a lot more frequent as a pet animal rather than dogs. And so in 2017, there was this really great report on cats in Canada, and they've shown that about 8 to 9 million cats live in Canadian homes. But then if we look at the cats that are outside, we find that up to 4 million stray and feral cats can be found in Canadian neighborhoods. And feral cats like to live in colonies, and I guess maybe I'm just curious, have you guys seen feral cat colonies around Okanagan? Have you encountered that? Not so much, hey? They could be really hard to spot, but even though cats do like to live in colonies, they don't always congregate and spend all their time together. It's been estimated that one colony could have up to 200 cats, but they would be so dispersed along the neighborhood that they don't often come together, and those people have hard times spotting them. Yeah? Yeah.
And they go out and catch the feral cats, neuter them, and when they're healthy, they release them.
For sure. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so the comment was that there are some organizations that do trap, neuter, release programs to help mitigate or to help manage feral cat colonies, and it's a big topic, and it's not something I'm not going to really talk about it today in the presentation, but that's one of the ways that the feral cats are certainly addressed in certain areas, though it has its pros and cons. And I think when we look at the issue of having cats outside when they do roam, it starts with something very small, with people having cat-related complaints. Then it could go into having public health risks, because we know that cats do transmit zoonotic diseases to humans as well as the parasites. From that, having too many unwanted cats, of course, leads to many cats being brought into shelters and also euthanized, and that's not something that we want to see. And then, of course, that leads to a larger feral cat problem in our neighborhoods, where you do start to look for the strategies to manage the colonies, such as the trap, neuter, release programs. And it all ends up being pretty costly for our municipalities, right? And so we need to consider that there would be money spent for the municipal agencies to control the feral cat colonies, and also subsidize humane shelters for cats so that we could rehome them. And it all leads to not only animal welfare issue in our neighborhoods, but also to the conservation of wildlife and environmental issues, since they're also interconnected. And because of that, I think it's really important that we gather today to talk about the impacts of roaming cats and how we can all do better. If we look at overall different dangers that cats are experiencing, of course, there's various threats that they face when they're outside. They could face predators such as coyotes, they could get hit by cars, of course get diseases, parasites, secondary poisoning, unwanted pregnancies, and list goes on. And because of that, we do really want to find ways that which we could still protect our cats, give them the access to the outdoors that is safe and supervised, and yet protect them from roaming too far and encountering those threats. One last thing that I want to talk about in the cat section is that cats are, and I kind of mentioned it already, cats are a source of human-related diseases such as toxoplasmosis. How many of you are familiar with toxoplasma? A couple of you. That's good. And I'm not going to dive too deeply into toxoplasmosis, but basically toxoplasma is the zoonotic disease that we can find in humans. And even though it might not be lethal for everybody, it's a risk to pregnant women and younger kids. And so that's something just to keep in mind, is that when we allow our cats to roam in the communities, they could bring in disease and parasites that we don't want to have, especially if those cats come into, say, playgrounds where kids spend a lot of time, then it becomes a human health concern. All right, so we've talked about cats, we've talked about birds, and what I want to introduce to you is our collaborative work in trying to create ways that we could make BC a safer place for both cats and wildlife. And we do that through encouraging responsible cat ownership and best practices for helping birds. So our work with the Cats and Birds team is really about addressing this issue as a One Health concern, because it affects both our environment, it affects our animal health and also human health. And we do that by collaborating with people from different avenues who encounter this issue and trying to find best practices that still allow cats to have a very fulfilling life and not be seen an antagonist in this story, and also providing ways for people to support birds in their own backyard. And of course, the first thing that we do recommend, if you are a cat owner or if you have friends with cats, is that we encourage them to have permanent identification, spaying and neutering. That we want to kind of highlight that indoor lifestyle is a great option for cats, especially if you provide indoor enrichment and play with your cat, spend enough time and care for them in the same way that you would care for a dog. But also consider having several cats living together at home so that they could keep each other company. That really provides good stimulation and physical activity for them at home, and also keeps them entertained and happy and cozy in the safe environment of your house. Now, if you have a cat that desperately needs to go outside and you can't keep them at home, there's also good ways that you can mitigate that. The easiest way that people sometimes use is the Birds Be Safe collar. Have you guys seen that in the past? Do you know what that is? I have one with me today. So this is this colorful little collar thing that you could put in your cat. And it's been shown that it can reduce predation on birds if you have the collar on the cat, because it's very colorful, it's very big and visible to birds. But I do want to sort of also highlight that it doesn't help to reduce predation on nestlings, right? Because the little tiny birds in the nest will not look at this color and know that there is a cat coming, but it does help with adult birds. So if somebody is interested to look closely at this Birds Be Safe collar, come up and check it out. I have 3 here, and I can kind of distribute them if you want to take them home and try on your cat. Yeah. Bell hasn't been shown to be as effective, and that's because the sound that the bell makes is not always recognized by birds as being a threat. So that it might, you might know that there's a cat in your backyard, you'll hear them, but it doesn't really help the birds as much as the visual clues do. But I think this is more of a small step that you can take. It's better to really fence your backyard if you allow your cat to roam, and make sure that they don't leave the area and just stay outside in your backyard. And you can do that by using cat-proof fencing. There are many designs on the market, and if you wanted to try them out, I recommend looking for those little rolling setups you can put in your fence so that cats stay within your backyard. Now, another really popular way is to build a catio, which is basically a cat catio or an enclosure outside, a little house that you can provide for your cat. It could be a really fun way for them to spend time outside, yet be safe from roaming to different properties. Cat run is another kind of popular way, and then also leash walking, which is becoming quite a trend in Vancouver. And I wanted to speak a little bit about the catios, because I know not everybody has the resources to build a catio, or sometimes it's hard to find designs that would suit you better, but there is a range of different catio ideas that you can find on the internet. They could be adjacent to your house, and where they're adjacent to, say, a window, and the cat can come in and out at any time when the window is open. There could be kind of like a patios for your cat. They could be also standalone little enclosures. And BC's PCA has amazing guides online. They're free to download. They have a list of all the different equipment you need, the time that you would spend on building a catio, if you want to take on a nice spring project and build this environment for your cat. You can also buy them ready to go and just kind of install them in your backyard. Does anybody have a catio or know anybody with a catio? Nice, very good. I know a few people in Penticton who built their own catios, and they don't look like that, but they still provide very fun environment for their cat, and they sort of have made up shelves and different hideout spots for cats to enjoy. All right, now shifting from responsible cat ownership to the best practices on protecting birds in your neighborhood. The research study that I mentioned earlier today that looked at the different ways that we're losing birds, they also came up with a nice list of things that we can do to help sustain or protect birds in our local neighborhoods. And so there's those 7 simple ways that are highlighted on the slide, and some of them would be applicable to cat owners, where it says keep cats indoors, but others would be for, say, people who have a garden. It's recommended that we plant native vegetation, especially shrubs and trees, to provide habitat for our birds. Sometimes I know it's sort of easy to think that if we plant too many flowers in our backyard, it would be great for hummingbirds, but it's recommended that if you decide to take on naturescaping and support wildlife in your backyard, go for something that lives year after year. So perennial plants such as shrubs provide great habitat, not just for food this summer, but also as a shelter for those birds to hide from predators, nest in, and have cover from the weather, right? So I think naturescaping is definitely a great way to support birds and other wildlife too. Avoiding pesticides or any other pollution to our environment is, again, a key way to protecting birds. Drinking shade-grown, bird-friendly coffee is also great. Does anybody know about bird-friendly coffee? A little bit? Great. So basically, this is just an option for you to buy beans for coffee that are grown in an environment that is not a kind of monocrop of beans down in the south. It's grown in a natural environment that still provides habitat for birds, and those you support better practices on the landscape by drinking the coffee and putting money into it. Another two big steps that you can take, well, first of all, of course, you can treat your windows to reduce window collisions, and I'll talk a little bit more about that, what you could do at home tonight when you get back. And then also, of course, engaging in citizen science and sharing your observations, noting the birds that you see in your backyard and looking at the trends from year after year. There's a lot of really great programs you can participate in. They're completely volunteer-based, they're free, and they're really fun because that's a way for you to learn about birds and also protect them by contributing to data. So I want to talk a little bit about window collisions because it's a major source of bird mortality. And how many of you have seen the stickers that look like a raptor, a big bird that you can put in your window? Have you seen them? There you go, good. And of course, usually in the pack, they have 3 to 4 stickers, which is definitely not enough. What you want to have is you want to have your entire window covered basically in stickers so that they're not reflective to birds. It could be costly, so not a lot of people do that. Instead, people choose to use feather-friendly dot design. You can see on the left-hand side there. This is a great alternative, and it's basically the little stickers you can put on the outside of your window. They're the tiny little dots. They don't kind of prevent the view, like you can still look through your window and enjoy the view, but yet they do help birds detect the glass before they fly into it. So that's one way, and you can buy those stickers online. You can also get them at Home Depot, gardening stores. Sometimes they would sell the feather-friendly design. If you don't want to spend money, you can also just attach string. Some people recommend leaving your windows dirty, just so that they're not reflective for birds, or putting something on the outside so that birds can see that there is a glass and they don't fly into it. If you apply any kind of design or a sticker, just make sure that they're pretty close together, right? So this diagram on the right-hand side shows you that the distance between the stickers, so the dots should be about 5 centimeters or less, okay? Now from here, I want to talk to you a little bit about this little sub-project that we have, which is called Cats and Birds Friendly Household. So if you know of anybody have cats and like to keep them indoors or only supervise them outdoors, or if you also know people who support birds, they could take a survey online and get this free decal that they could put in their window or in their car or wherever, maybe on your guitar, and it just says that you support keeping cats indoors or protect them and protect cats, wildlife, and people. Basically, just shows the commitment. We have quite a few people now taking in part in this project in Vancouver, and we hope that we can get a kind of community going with cat and bird friendly households in Okanagan too. If you're interested, come have a look. I also have a little card that tells you a little bit more about the project and how you can take the survey, and just to learn more. And I also want to highlight is that Stewardship Center does develop a lot of science-based resources and best practices for stewards on the landscape. We have all of the resources available online for free download, and some of them are more sort of I guess, technical, and they provide some advice for local governments on the examples of bylaws that could be introduced to help mitigate the problem of roaming cats. But then we also have easy to navigate resources such as this brochure, which is called The Happy Cat. It's pretty popular, and I have a few here today. You can pick them up on the way out. They're just at the table. You can also find it online. And it basically has a summary of all the different practices that cat owners and non-cat owners can use to support the project. The last portion of this presentation I want to really dedicate to our research projects that we've launched a few years back. So Cats and Birds team looked at various data available about roaming cats, and we noted that locally we don't necessarily have good estimates of how many cats are out there. And so in 2020, we started the first research program in Vancouver, where we set up a ton of cameras across Vancouver, and we photographed cats. And the cameras were set up in various neighborhoods. They were residential areas, industrial areas, parks. And what we did is that we photographed cats and other wildlife that are roaming in the city for almost a full year. And now we're in the process of processing the data and trying to estimate how many cats are out there or what are the most kind of popular places for them to be in. At the same time, having a cat count, we also launched a bird count so that we can go to the same neighborhoods and see, well, how many birds are in those areas where we see cats and what kind of habitat do they like? What kind of plants, perhaps, or shrubs that they like to utilize. And this was a great project. It was the first one in BC that was launched to access data on cats and birds. And I'm excited to share with you that this year we launched a similar project here in Okanagan. And so what we have is, or actually, maybe before I go into Okanagan, I'll just share with you a few cool results. So this was an image taken by Vancouver Cat Count. This is a cat with a bird in its mouth. Does anybody know what bird it is? Can anybody guess? No? Yes. Pacific wren, great job. Yes, this was a Pacific wren. The shot was taken in kind of Hastings area of Vancouver, and you can see that the cat on the photo has a collar. So we know it's an owned cat that is allowed to go outside. And the Pacific wren is an example of our native little songbird. And as I said, songbirds are at most risk from cat predation. And as much as we are concerned about the cat being killed, the bird being killed by cat, we're also concerned about those cats being outside. As we know, this is an owned pet. What we wanted to highlight with this research is also when cats go out, they encounter various other wildlife. And so these are the images that were taken in the same general location, but different time of the day. And they are kind of lumped together in this collage. And what you see is that this area is also visited by coyotes, there's a skunk and raccoons. And basically knowing that urban environments, even if we don't think of them as being home to wildlife, they often really give an opportunity for our pets to encounter other animals and perhaps engage in a conflict, such as a fight or disease transfer between wild animals and pets. And so now going back to our Okanagan-based project, we have Olivia Wilson today, who's a master's student who just started her research in Okanagan, and she'll tell you a little bit more about cats and birds count that she does here in the valley. Here you go. I'm going to mute myself.
Hello, so I'm Olivia Wilson. I am a master's student with UNBC studying birds, bats, and cats in the South Okanagan Valley. So I'm also using trail cameras to study free roaming domestic cats. We're putting them up in different habitat uses from Okanagan Falls to Osoyoos. So we're looking at, so the Vancouver cat count was more so the urban, and I'm looking at the protected areas, the peri-urban, kind of those areas where cats might be found. So we're putting trail cameras up in urban, peri-urban, agricultural, and protected areas. And right now I'm also looking for volunteers. I have 60 trail cameras up right now, but at the beginning of April, I have to move them to another 60 locations. So if anyone knows people who live in OK Falls, Oliver, Osoyoos, who might be interested in hosting a trail camera for me, let me know. And so along with this, I'm also going to be doing bird point counts at the trail camera location so I can see specifically what birds could be at risk of predation by the cats. So that's what I'm doing right now. That's why I'm dressed like this. I just came from the field doing point counts all morning. So yeah, that's all I've got. And I'm doing this from now until the end of December. So I'm going to look at the seasonal changes in the cat populations and the birds.
I'll turn my mic on. Can you guys hear me? Good. Okay, yeah, and so I guess to highlight again, going back to the citizen science aspect of it, this is the first research that is done on roaming cats and birds in Okanagan, and it's really a great opportunity for you to be engaged. And even if you don't want to host a camera, or if you don't want to go out and count birds, just keep an eye on the project and be curious about the results, because I think it's interesting to find out what is actually happening with our wildlife and our pets in our backyards. So I think I'm very happy that the research has started in Okanagan, and I'm excited to see what we find. With that, I really want to conclude my presentation and thank our partners and funders for giving us an opportunity to work on this important issue. And also thank you for coming. Let me know if you have any questions. Yeah, I can see one question.
People don't declaw the cats anymore, I hope.
No, well, I can't speak for everybody, but it's not the recommended practice, so yeah.
It's kind of cruel. They can, if they want, get a scratching board or a scratching post. Don't cost much.
Certainly inhumane, so we don't recommend that. But thanks for bringing that up. Yeah.
Periodically, the city of Penticton gets requests from people that cats should be licensed, like dogs.
Yes.
Are you aware of any municipalities that have actually followed through on that?
Yeah.
And what are some of the challenges? Can you repeat the question?
Certainly. Thank you for a question. This is a great one. So the question was about cat licensing and whether there are any municipalities who take up that approach in mitigating roaming cat issue. Calgary is a prime example of a location who have utilized cat licensing, and it was a successful model that was brought up by the city, I think in 2006, I want to say. It was a while back. And what they did is they also had a roaming cat problem. And in order to address the issue, they decided to introduce cat licensing along with collaboration with animal humane societies and trapping and spaying the cats. And they were very successful because they've reduced the number of cats being euthanized. They've reduced the number of cats being outside. And they also have helped to rehome a lot of feral cats. And so this year, actually, they're doing an update to their animal responsibility bylaw, and our organization is working closely with people from Calgary and establishing meetings this year to try to get some lessons learned from them and see if we could implement that in BC. Another cool thing about cat licensing is that, of course, it costs money, and not everybody could afford that. So what they did is that they've created a scale, a range of basically discounted licensing and spay and neutering provided for some people who cannot afford those. And then also the money taken up by licensing or by this program also sponsors the program, so no taxpayer monies were used for that model. So that was really good. Thank you. Yeah. Yes, so the question was about bird-friendly cities. We're not working with anybody in the Okanagan who are trying to get the certification, or not certification, but the status of the bird-friendly city, but we're currently looking at that in Vancouver. Mm-hmm. Any more questions? Are there any questions in chat, maybe? Go ahead.
You had a picture there. I think it was a swallow was in a narrow space. What was up with that narrow space? What was the bird doing in there?
And the narrow space, I was probably, I don't know, in the bar. Was it just in the box? Oh, I see that. Yeah, there was a photo about 7 steps you can take and flying through the gap. Yeah, it's just to show their maneuverability. And also, I'm gonna switch back if I can to this photo. I can move the slides. So this is another example of why we were talking about that 5-centimeter gap in your windows. Oh yeah, so see here. What it says is that if you're setting up any stickers on your window and they are too far apart, the birds are so good at flying into tight spots that they will not recognize this gap to be a glass, right? And they could try to go through it. That's why having stickers close together is very important.
You could have a grid instead of just...
A grid, yeah, that's a good, yeah. The more you have, the better, for sure. Yes, yeah. Sorry, go ahead with the question. Too many windows. Yeah. Adopted cats are kept indoors as part of the adoption rules. So BCSPCA does recommend indoor lifestyle for cats, but it's not to say that all cats have to be at home. So that BCSPCA also recognizes that for the well-being of cats, we do still want to provide outdoor access. It just has to be supervised and restricted, right? So we don't want them to go on their own and roam as far as they want, but make sure we leash walk and have a catio. I can't speak to exactly the things that you sign off on BCSPCA when you take the cats, but BCSPCA is one of our partners who work on the Cats and Birds project, and we do align in the same ideas as that, yes, we only recommend indoor enrichment or restricted supervised outdoor access because it helps sustain animal welfare as much as it helps with bird conservation. Oh, yeah. With Penticton SPCA, what I can say is that last month, actually, I was in touch with them and dropped off a few brochures and posters, and they were keen about the program. So perhaps that's something for me to look into and ask them what their best practices are in recommending. But what I was speaking to in general, BCSPCA, we are working with the agency in Vancouver, or the organization in Vancouver, and it was our understanding that it was the general practices for the entire province of British Columbia. And so I can't speak to particular one, but I know that they were very keen and helpful when it came to promoting this project here in Okanagan. So hopefully they do recommend that too. And then Volcra in Vancouver does a great job doing TNR. Yeah, that's a great comment. Volcra is another animal humane organization in Vancouver. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Certainly, they have to be on the outside. Basically, anything you can put in your window that reduces that reflection would be great. And with the dots, what I tried to say is that often enough businesses would use the little dot design, the feather-friendly dots, because they're not as noticeable for a person when you walk by. They look pretty much elegant, and then they could be used in the business setting. And so for a household, it's a great alternative. And you can buy, so the feather-friendly dots, they come on a tape. You don't have to measure out the 5 centimeters. It's very easy. You just put the tape on your window and it's good to go. And that's why I think it's a great solution to use if you want to put some stickers. No, no. Oh, yeah, I see that would be hard to put on. So maybe just leave your windows dirty then. Leave your windows dirty, don't clean them up. Yeah. Any more questions? No? Looks good. Okay, well, thanks everybody for coming. Get in touch if you want to learn more or volunteer in Okanagan. It was good to have you here all. Yeah?